Well, culture of data use means primarily that that's what's happening. Data use is happening, and that kind of means it's happening by everyone. A few years ago, at one of our REL Bridge events, Jeff Wayman, who's an esteemed colleague researcher in the field of data use, identified this concept that when we think about data culture, we want to see that data is used as something that happens when nobody else is looking, and that there's an energy around that. One of the earliest sort of references to data culture in the field was in 2005 when Margaret Heritage and Ray Yeagley wrote in one of their data use textbooks that in a culture of data use, what you hear educators saying is that using data is just the way we do things around here. So if you think back to our poll, the framing of having, sometimes groups of folks primarily responsible for that data use practice is a challenge if we want to think about the fact that a culture of data use is disseminating data use practices throughout the organization so that as folks are having an opportunity to think about that practice and use this for instructional improvement, it's happening in the regular way of doing business in the school. And it's just there as part of that daily work of teaching and learning and improvement. That helps us think about this idea of the culture of data use and our work on the research aspect of this. Because it's certainly the case that over the last 15 or 20 years, we've developed a fairly significant body of research that looks at educational data use practices. We have some important summaries that have been done. We have a lot of research about what's happening inside of schools, what does good collaborative inquiry look like, things like that. But we have very little that gives us a roadmap to really think about what are the actual characteristics of, or how do you get there? What are the specific ways that you could do that? What's the roadmap that we need? And in our thinking about this, we know, for example, that the knowledge and skills that are necessary to turn a data finding into an instructional action is something that teachers tell us is really, really hard. This requires knowledge of their students. It requires knowledge of curriculum, deep content knowledge, pedagogical skills, and the right sort of sets of interpretive frameworks to be able to make that transition or that translation from understanding data findings to moving something out into an instructional change or a practice change to do that. And we know that that has to happen in collaborative teams, and we know that's a big part of it, but that's only one small part of data analysis and use. And we know that in some schools, and I've been an example of this, but there's also really good examples in the research. There's a great study by Little and Horn in 2010 that looked at this, that you can have the same professional development, the same leadership, the same data sets that folks are working with, and in the same school, you could have one team that uses collaborative practices in really astoundingly important ways and moves the dial on student learning, and you can have another team where teachers are so upset by what happens in the data teams that they retreat into more privatized practice and less collaborative practice overall. And so we really wanted to think about that as we were looking at this culture of data use framework. What are the things that help make for consistent, daily, everyday use of data to guide improvement?